what works on intellectual equations.
Fine. So I think they were on this list. In other words, if you take the notion of a field with a derivation, or with a finite number of the commuting derivations, then there is, this theory does have a model completion. This was noticed by Abraham Robinson. And therefore, there's a canonical model for it, which already does not have very strong competition on the topological side. It's a canonical place to work in differential algebra. Furthermore, by enormous luck, it's stable. It satisfies all the assumptions, and therefore the theory applies to it. Now, by itself, you kind of understand it. But suppose you take a complicated nonlinear differential equation and you look at the structure inside it. You have no idea what it is anymore, right? I mean, to solve the equation is hopeless, and you don't know what's inside, but this theory applies. So therefore, you know, on a priori, in particular, the trichotomy is true. You have sufficient topology to make the trichotomy true. So on a priori grounds, you know that no matter what is the topology inside it, what is the structure inside it, it must be coordinatized by one of a number of geometries which you can understand. Well, one of the possibilities is algebraic geometry, but it turns out the only way that can sit inside the solution is in the rare cases where the solutions can be parameterized by constants, by finite number of constants. So if you're away from that, then you're in a number of much simpler geometries of linear type, and you can use it to say things about dependence between solutions, right? So this was used to show that if you have a family of a billion varieties, which really are different, are not as trivial, and you look at the rational sections of that, then there are no unexpected algebraic relations among rational sections. Because, well, you have to do the analysis, but you reduce it to one geometry or the other. The compatibility with the group law is from here, and you show that the geometry it's reduced to must be of linear type, and it must be a group theoretic relation.
Can you define this compactification, which Kansei was talking about in some logical term?
I suggest we will let you 20 minutes to think about this. We will meet at 5 o'clock. We have a discussion on these two lectures, following immediately by the promised discussion on topic.
Just I want.
So we should start. So if there are questions or remarks concerning the first lectures, game theory, rationality. Yes, please. You have many questions. Okay, so if you take this.
No, first question's maybe nonsense. You didn't mention application soccer, poker, and maybe it's not nonsense. I don't know. Can you?
Okay. Come to microphone.
Maybe everybody come to the microphone.
It's not nonsense at all. In fact, there are two questions here, soccer and poker, and let me take it in the opposite order, poker and soccer. Poker is one of the motivating examples in game theory. It was considered already by von Neumann in his 1928 paper in which he proved the Minimax theorem. And the thing about poker is that it's a game of imperfect information, so that neither one knows the other one's cards, and each side has information about its own cards, and does not have information or does not have complete information about the other side's cards. And also you give a signal with your with your bid, yes, and there's bluffing and the whole business, and it has very many of the elements of game theory. And in fact, the simplified poker models were considered very early on, as I say in von Neumann's paper already, and then afterwards, some non-zero sum three-person pokers were considered by Nash and Shapley and others in the early 50s, and a lot of the motivating force for poker came from there, and a lot of the insights. The bluffing was explained and so on, yeah? And I have a little anecdote about this, which I'd like to share with you. I don't want to take too much time. Very early on, when I was in Israel, maybe a year or two, somebody called me up and said that Professor Aryeh Dvoretsky had suggested me for the task of testifying at a trial in which some poker club was being prosecuted for operating an illegal gambling operation. And I was supposed to testify for the defense. And indeed, I came and testified. And the argument of the defense was that poker is not forbidden by law. It's a game of skill. It's not a game of luck, basically. And I testified to that effect, that it is a game of skill. There's a lot of skill involved over there. When to bluff, how much to bluff, what strategies to use, and perhaps not explicitly to use mixed strategies, but there's a lot of implicit knowledge, just like there is in chess, for example. And the judge heard me very carefully and wrote down what I had to say, and convicted the I don't mind saying who the judge was. His name was Yaakov Bazak, a fairly well-known judge on the Israeli scene. He's now retired, a little about five to 10 years older than me. He's retired. I met him at a party. He's not a friend, but an acquaintance of mine, a friend and a friend. I said to him at the party 3 weeks later, he said, Yaakov, why did you convict these people? He said, Yisrael, you don't know how much damage these poker clubs cause. People come to, they spend all their money. They spend all their salary. There's nothing to eat for the children, for the wife. He said, but yeah, I said to him, Yaakov, you know, I testify. You know that the law is that this is games of skill are forbidden. Yeah. Sorry, games of luck are forbidden, not games of skill. He said, yes, I know, of course. So you didn't believe me? You thought I was lying when I testified that this is a game of skill? He said, no, of course you're telling the truth. He said, I know you. You didn't even have to swear because we know each other. Yes, you wouldn't lie. So I said, so why did you convict? So he said, Israel, you don't understand how much damage these... Well, this went on, you know, we were talking right past each other this way, yes? He had a certain idea of social justice. Like many judges in Israel, the law doesn't interest him. He had his idea of what's right and what's wrong, and that was social justice. So that's as far as poker is concerned. Now, I'd like to answer your question about soccer, because that is somewhat different. It has to do with skill and so on, yeah. In fact, I won't answer directly about soccer, but about a different sport. His name is tennis, okay? Tennis. Tennis, there has just been a very remarkable paper, also not yet published. I think it's to be published in the AER, in the American Economic Review. It's the name of the paper is Minimax at Wimbledon, okay? It turns out that the players in the championship players, not you and me, okay? Maybe you're a champion, I'm not, okay? Championship tennis players play remarkably according to Minimax theory. First of all, this is, in a sense, a two-person zero-sum game. They play independently in sequential plays, and they play in the right proportions. They play to the left and to the right of the court on the serve. We're talking about the serve, yes? There is an implicit, the analysis of this thing is not easy, but when you do it right, it turns out that they play remarkably according to Minimax. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, maybe it's more nonsense. It's the next question.
Yeah, neither of these questions.
Yeah. No, but next probably real nonsense. Yeah. Yeah. No, what's the maximum? So the maximum is like Lagrangian. We minimize something, but quantum mechanics tell us it's only approximation. So maximum some numbers. It's kind of It's basically you take sum of exponents xi over temperature and take logarithm multiply by temperature, and temperature goes to 0. Yeah. In physics, what people calculate is a sum of exponents instead of taking maximum in real life. Does it make sense for for game theory? Introduce temperature. Maybe it's some large limits. I don't know.
What is this? The maximum is approximately this. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is kind of more algebraic.
You're talking about a method for calculating the maximum.
Yes,
okay?
yeah.
It's a calculation.
Yeah, I would take minimum of maximum and so on. But
Yeah.
replacement. Yeah, replacement of. Yeah.
It's a different object, so
Yeah.
but it says it's approximately equal.
It's approximately, yeah, but not exactly.
Well, I mean, okay, I don't know anybody in game theory who's looked at that kind of thing, but it might be a good way of calculating these things or approximating. But if you can do it exactly, which is what we aim to do, why do it approximately? Yeah?
No, but in physics there is something like called small canonical ensemble and large canonical ensemble, which is algebraically better, which gives essentially the same thing, but okay, I don't know. So it was real nonsense. Okay. Okay.
So, you'd like to add temperature to game theory? Okay. Yeah.
This concerning your game, say, in politics or whatever. However, when you play this game, also there are laws that we created. And have you considered also creation, the laws, the rules for the game? Because they intervened, yeah? You play some law in politics, a game in politics, but according to certain rules. But the rules change all the time. It might depend which strategy you use. Designing these rules for the game, is it part of your approach or not?
Sure. Where the game is changing.
The rule in the country changed, the rule for election changed.
Yeah.
Designing this so that you can strategy and change the rule.
Well, let me say that there's a book which appeared recently, or not a year or two ago, by Adam Brandenburger of the Harvard Business School and Barry Nailbuff of the Yale School of Management, and economics in Yale also. And this book is called Co-opetition, okay? It's meant for businessmen. It was a bestseller for a while on the business list of books. It's not a book of mathematics. There's all kinds of examples. And one of the big points they're making is, now both of these people are game theorists, by the way. Yes, that's how they grew up in their childhood. They were game theorists. Now they're management people. Both still game theorists. Now, the book takes off from game theory, but one of the important points it makes is for a businessman, as a business strategy, to change the rules, just like you're saying. To change the rules and to change the rules in order to make things more convenient for you. Now, I think every situation has rules, formally speaking, yes, which bind one. So to the extent that it's possible to change the rules while conforming to some larger set of rules, sure, I mean, the theory takes this into account. Whether there are specific examples of this in the literature where sort of changing the rules is the point, I mean, we have this book of Brandenburger and Nailbuff, and certainly that is part of the literature, so we have that, but if you want a specific model of this, I can't recall at the moment, but certainly it's part of the game, yes.
Maybe my previous question about spiders. Can you explain exactly what two sets of data are being correlated? You observe the production of spider and they fight. How you collect these numbers when they correlate them? Because prediction means you find correlation between two independent set of observations. A priori, you don't know they're correlated. How you do that? You have to be sure it's really clean. I mean, because there are all kind of...
Well, you know, I mean, if they did this right, let me say right away that I did read their paper, but I don't recall the details of it exactly. But it seems to me if I were designing this experiment, then of course the way I would do it is to see what they're doing, what these spiders are doing, and then to write down a matrix game, okay? Write down a matrix game based on what these specific spiders were doing, various sets of spiders, and then to look at the actual distribution of, well, in this case it would be phenotypes, I mean, because you don't examine the genes actually, but the distribution of the actions, the strategies that the people are using, and it was a mixed strategy distribution, so it was a distribution consisting not of one, and then putting in the fitnesses into the matrix, and you check whether this is whether this is an equilibrium. And then, if they did it right, and I have a lot of faith in these young people, to take the whole thing and say, okay, this is an equilibrium, let's check it on a fresh set of data. This is what I would have done. Whether they actually did this, I don't know. Maybe they only did the first part. I think you're right that they should have done the second part also, to check the whole thing on a fresh set of data. But I think it's already, first of all, I agree with you that they probably did do it the right way. I can't guarantee because I don't recall the paper at the moment to that extent. But even if they just wrote down the matrix, measured the egg masses, so they got the fitnesses for each pair of, for each meeting of one kind of spider with another kind of spider, and then noted that this is an equilibrium, an Asch equilibrium, I think this is quite interesting. Yeah.
I would like to make one comment. I think, further generally, I mean, when it comes to pure mathematics, we've seen in this conference a lot of visions. Some of them are quite absurd, and a lot of reckless conjectures, some of them by myself, etc. But when it comes to pure mathematics, the ultimate test is proving the theorems. When it comes to applied mathematics, the situation is more delicate. So if I interpret the situation right, the question is, does the modeling, does the amazing success in this example or similar, the tennis example, depends on the modeling, the specific modeling, which can be arbitrary, which was chosen. Now, this can be tested, this can be studied. If the success of 1% very much depends on the modeling, then no matter how it came to be like this, then this reduced how impressive this result. If the success does not depend on arbitrary parameter of the modeling, then this is very impressive. And I think this type of critical study of empirical experiments is very important, especially for a young field that with no much empirical experience and a lot of eagerness to prove to be successful empirically. So actually I have some experience. I can help you looking at this particular experiment. So is there some more questions on game theory? Spiders, webs, sex? Yes, yes, Lassie.
Just the temperature of the game reminded me that there is a theory, a games theory, where temperature of games is introduced, and that's Conway's. Sorry. I wonder if the question is whether the Conway-Berlekamp games theory fits in somehow in your perspective.
Okay, I'm glad you raised that, because there's really two kinds of game theory. It's really, and the Conway-Berlekamp is one kind of game theory, which I have to say I haven't studied it carefully. But my impression of it is that it's a theory of specific games and how to solve specific games, okay? How to solve specific games of a general class and many specific games of that class, and how to solve them. Many of them are infinite. And we do some of that in the type of game theory that I was talking about. But most of the game theory that I was talking about is not of that kind. It's not how to solve specific games. It's about a general theory which applies to a whole bunch of different possibilities. Many of the games are perhaps not well defined, and part of the problem is to build models for them, like Professor Kalai was saying. Now, so it's a very different kind of thing, and in fact, I think one of the great triumphs, it's something I didn't get to, one of the early triumphs of the von Neumann-Morgenstern kind of game theory, which was what I was talking about, is that there are games where we know who wins, but we don't know how to do it. Yeah, there's the game of hex, for example. This is a game where we know that the first player wins. We know he wins, but we don't know how to do it. It's based on a theorem, a fundamental theorem about games of perfect information, and we have a proof that we can win. We don't know how to do it. In some sense, this would not be satisfactory from the Conway-Berlekamp point of view, because they are into solving specific games. I'm sorry I don't know more about the Conway-Berlekamp. Maybe I would be able to address that more carefully. Maybe Professor Aviezri Frankel from the Weizmann Institute is an expert in that kind of game theory. You have a specific game, you want to solve it, and we're talking more about general theory, so maybe he could address that better if he's there. Yes?
Actually, from here, because it's one sentence. I wonder if you use these things from cryptography that have to do with how to play, say, poker in the phone, and how to hide information or share information between the players is part of game theory, or is part of some other thing?
No, I think I would make a sharp distinction between that and Conway-Berlekamp. Yes, that is part of game theory, absolutely. It fits in very well with game theory, and in fact, papers by François Forge or Barani or those people who are into that stuff, how to play poker by these have appeared in Econometrica, which is a flagship journal it's sort of the Annals of Mathematics of Economics. They have appeared there. They do form a very important part of game theory. This is connected with communication, with correlated equilibrium, with all those things, how to play a correlated equilibrium without having a specific correlating device, and so on and so forth. Yes, that is a part of game theory, absolutely.
Just please, don't take it. Are there more questions on Poker by phone, other things by phone, game theory, phone sex, the mathematics. I mean, this is the future. So now that are there some remark, question concerning the second talk about geometry and the models?
I didn't understand this. Could there be a definition of T categorical? Alpha on, alpha 1 categorical.
What the definition is?
Yeah.
So,
and then maybe could you state your theorem again? I think it's
wasn't my theorem, but this okay? So, first of all, the notion of an absolutely categorical theory is a theory, a set of...
Is group theory an example of a theory?
Yes. It's an example of a theory which is extremely incomplete and furthermore does not have a canonical completion. You can just complete it in various ways. On the other hand, field theory is also incomplete, but you can pick out one nice completion, theory of algebraically closed fields. And logic explains one reason why that's good and why you might want to work there. Now that theory turns out to be categorical. Yeah, so categorical means that the first order theory actually completely describes the model up to isomorphism. That's categorical. It turns out that algebraically closed, yes, algebraically closed fields of any fixed characteristic is a categorical, well, it's a category, okay, so first of all, there are no examples of categorical theories. The corrected notion is of a theory categorical given the size of the set. The first order sentences just have nothing to do with size and cannot control the size of an infinite set. So the corrected notion is, okay, fine, but give me the size and then I'll tell you what the structure is. Now, the theory of, let's say, algebraically closed fields of characteristic 2 has various models, and we know that the isomorphism type just depends on the transcendence degree, the absolute transcendence degree. Now, in high transcendence degree, it's the same as the cardinality, so this theory is categorical. It's completely described by the first order theory. That's an example, and it turns out that it's not a notion which is supposed to have many examples. It's a notion which has a few classical examples, and it somehow creates, yeah, sorry.
What is the alpha non, alpha 1 adjective in front of categorical?
Yeah, so I said so totally categorical means you give me a set, the theory determines the structure on that set for a set of any infinite size. Now you can qualify it. Well, okay, so algebraically closed fields of characteristic 3, they're completely determined by one parameter, the transcendence degree, but that is not quite the same as the cardinality. It is the same once you become uncountable, but the field can be countable and have various finite transcendence degrees. So if you give me an uncountable set, there's going to be a unique structure of an algebraically closed field of a given characteristic on it, but not a countable set. Therefore, this theory is categorical in power alpha 1, for example, but it is not alpha 0 categorical. So the end, the continuing part of the story was about things which are just categorical in power alpha 1, such as algebraically closed fields.
Well, I would like to ask you, is there a relation between these coordination theorems and theorems about coordinations of combinatorial geometries or, Tietz buildings and this kind of thing?
So, I mean, there might. I'm not exactly going to answer the question. Instead, I'm going to say how these theorems are used. So, there may be a relation, and I mean, there's a relation with much more trivial and elementary thing that I gave the example of, namely just the fact that when you have an algebraic variety locally, you can coordinatize a point on the variety by a finite number of points. But the idea of these coordinatization theorems is that you are not given this in advance. So it's like there was a talk given in which there was a picture, which was and you had to, which was just very complicated, and you had to describe how to separate it into one-dimensional, two-dimensional parts, which was not given in advance. So this theorem, the idea of it is to take a structure which is unknown and to give you a method for saying, aha, this part should be well described by complex algebraic geometry, and this part should be well described by linear algebra, to give you tools to do that. But so there are many concrete contexts in which you have examples of this. But the power of it is that what you have has an unknown structure, such as the set of solutions to a very complicated nonlinear differential equation.
What about logic as an art of asking questions in geometry?
Well, yeah, Abraham Robinson would have liked that, right? I mean,
What was the question? Can you repeat it?
Logic as the art of asking questions in geometry. Yeah, that's closer to what. That's actually closer to what I had in mind. I mean, for a while, the progress of the field was determined by completely internal questions, and it reached a certain state. And my feeling is that right now, the best way to go forward is by giving ourselves challenges of trying to be able to deal with new types of existing geometries. As for logic as a way of asking questions in geometry, sometimes that happens. So there are certain canonical processes, like the notion of a model completion, and you can start with a geometric theory, and it leads you to certain questions. Sometimes, I mean, very often in geometry, I ran into that for example, in the context of trying to understand the Frobenius automorphisms. Axe had found the asymptotic theory of finite fields. Now, a finite field, normally you understand it as a set of fixed points of an automorphism. So it's nice to think, well, okay, but is there an asymptotic theory of the whole dynamics, not just of the fixed points? So you take an algebraically closed field of characteristic P with the Frobenius automorphism, you try to understand asymptotic theory. And this was answered by McIntyre and by myself, and it leads, I mean, you can ask the model theoretic question, it leads you to certain geometric questions, and it leads you to extremely interesting questions, well, I think in algebraic geometry, which are kind of close to existing theory, but not quite. So it does happen. But once it's a mechanism for asking questions, it's not an art anymore. It's an art.
Just repeat you back what you asked after the lecture by Victor. That can you give some model-theoretic approach and conception which includes the simple Lie-algebras, Strip-algebra, maybe something else, and then you will understand why they're there. Can you imagine such framework?
In fact, my feeling is, I mean, within logic, there are a number of quite disconnected components, and one of them is proof theory. Proof theories and model theories are somehow, they somehow deal with different things. Proof theories take the formal objects very, very seriously. And model theories, well, they know that they're there, but they like not to think about them. And actually, when I hear a talk like Maxime gave, it feels like, you know, I mean, it's just fantastic proof theory. You just really look at the associative law as an object, and you try to perturb it. I just don't. So I mean, things seem to be going in this direction of more power. It would be fantastic to try to find a model theoretic equivalence to it, and I mean, there is a very naive answer, namely, yes. I mean, you try to look if there's a model completion and this kind of thing. I think that's it's probably much too naive to give the right answer. So, but I mean, one can try things like that. Well, I just sorry, superalgebras.
Also, the kind of geometry, yeah, might be defined. But on the model theoretic theorem is something much more general, will be something else where it should miss by the algebra. Model theoretically, logically, you can divide, discover new structures.
Yeah. I don't know.
This is the third structure is defined as algebra geometry.
Yeah, it's not between, it's just sideways. Yeah,
It's a new structure,
yeah.
but it has no satisfactory model.
It has models, and the models are okay, we just don't know exactly what to do with them. I mean, it exists.
Not even like a common term, yeah.
What?
Just cannot derive it from non-structures.
Yeah, first of all, you cannot derive it from non-structures. It doesn't seem to live well with topology. At least it has no smooth parts in some sense. I mean, the idea that if you put a dimension theory on it and you cut by a hyperplane, it doesn't go down by one, nowhere. And yeah, I mean, it's just that having constructed it, we don't exactly know what to do with it. Yeah, but it's possible. And it's very. I mean, I don't. That's all I can say. I don't know. But in fact, that's not what these new algebras suggest, because what I did not mention at all is higher dimensional things. I almost didn't mention them, and that's a part of stability theory that exists, that is very well developed, and that it's very tempting to think has not been applied so far. All the applications of the finite dimensional theory, and of course, it's tempting to think that this will also connect to something. But no, I don't have anything to say about it.
Stability theory use combinatorial geometry as part of the structure?
Absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, so I mean, in the end, after these recognition theorems, you see something like algebraic geometry. But before that, there's a moment where they exist as abstract things, and the first thing that you get is a structure of a matroid of a combinatorial geometry, absolutely. So the theory of Shelach, of the question that he was really trying to, the great motivating question was the number of models. So you're given a cardinality, but an infinite cardinality, and you try to say how many isomorphism types of models a theory can have in that cardinality, and you need a certain amount of analysis, and the whole analysis is in terms of a large number of combinatorial geometries. Initially, you know nothing about them, but the structure is coordinatized in terms of, yeah.
You say we need a proof series, maybe?
Well,
some proof series come forward?
I mean, what I want to say, which is if you let me say something which is unrelated to today, but I mean, and that, yeah, I mean, when I said logic, and somehow I have a bad feeling, giving the feeling that I represent logic, which I don't at all. I don't know if I represent model theory. But anyway, we have this is one component of logic, which is adjacent. I mean, it's the only one which is at all adjacent to geometry, to algebraic geometry. So when I said logic and geometry, I thought this would identify this component. But then during this meeting, I just noticed very, very strongly the absence, in particular, of set theory. And if it's a meeting towards 2000, meaning, well, so, I mean, somehow reflecting what happened between 1900 and 2000, then I think any reasonable account of the deepest ideas in mathematics in this century might very well omit model theory altogether, but it would have to mention set theory. I mean, I have no relation to it. As you see from this picture, it's much further from me than algebraic geometry is. It's really far away. But I learned it as a graduate student, and I saw very, very deep things. And I mean, in the other tours that I had after that, I never really saw anything deeper. The difficulty is that it involves different notions, but that's an exciting thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It is not about sets. And it is definitely not about just giving more pedantic proofs of existing theorems. It's also about things like, I mean, Gödel is responsible for some of the basic objects discovered. The first one is L, which is a kind of functor from models of set theory to models of set theory. Sorry, yeah. What? In set theory. So, I mean, just for the beginning of set theory, everybody knows about Cantor, and everybody knows about Gödel, but people just know one of Gödel's three great theorems. They know that somehow, well, the one that fitted better with this century, this kind of postmodern theorem about undecidability. But he had two classical and very, very beautiful, 19th century style theorems in the sense that they constructed something. One of them I mentioned in this talk, and the other one is the construction of L, the first really set theoretic object. So that was the beginning of set theory. And I should also say, I mean, there was a question here about the axiom of choice. This kind of thing has been settled. L shows that for any question of the type considered in this conference, any question of number theory, any question about real numbers, I mean, one has to qualify that precisely, but for any question vaguely like the ones considered in these talks, the axiom of choice is irrelevant. There exist axioms of set theory which are totally relevant, but any proof using the axiom of choice, as freely as you like, of, I don't know, some fact in number theory, you just need to add one line quoting one extra statement without changing the length or the elegance of the proof. You get a proof that does not use the axiom of choice. The other key people, I don't know, one theorem which is still very famous, it's the only theorem that makes it into Dieudonné's, I don't know, panorama of pure mathematics, is Solovey's theorem concerning Lebesgue measurable sets. So it uses Cohen's forcing method, but state it. So the theorem says that, I'm going to state now well, one version is in terms of consistency, namely that if you do not assume the axiom of choice, it is possible that every set of real numbers is Lebesgue measurable. So you don't have to worry about it. A stronger theorem, which uses various axioms of infinity, doesn't matter. Well, anyway, a stronger theorem is that even if you have the axiom of choice in the background, any set that you have explicitly constructed, but maybe extremely ineffectively, or you're allowed to use whatever cardinal you like, whatever you're allowed to use, whatever you like, but just any real number you like, any ordinal you like, but you have not explicitly, if you're not actually used in a random choice function, it will be Lebesgue measurable. The beauty of the theorem is not so much the statement as the proof, which uses Cohen's forcing method, but not to prove a negative thing like Cohen proved, that some axiom is independent, but in some sense, in some sense to give a positive construction. You want more names? There is, I don't know, Martin Steele settled questions in set theoretic topology, which were open since the beginning of the century, exactly about questions of Lebesgue measurability and so on. So with a lot of effort, people in the early part of the century proved that, let's say, Borel sets are, well, Lebesgue measurable, and analytic sets, projections of Borel sets, and their complements are. And beyond that, the answer was just unknown. Yes, if you take a Borel set, take an analytic set of real numbers, analytic, I mean a projection of a closed set. Maybe that word is not used anymore. But anyway, take a fairly simple set of real numbers, which is constructed quite explicitly, and ask whether it must be Lebesgue measurable. This kind of question was raised and was not answered, and it was not answered for good reason, because the answer is strictly equivalent to certain objects which are considered to involve very large cardinals, but in fact they're they're structures that are intimately connected with real numbers, much more so than Aleph 1, for instance. This was work of Martin and Steele. I should say, again, the ideas behind that were absolutely fantastic, and more important than the fact that they settled 60-year-old questions raised by people like Lebesgue. But the paper was rejected from one of the most prominent mathematics journals without being read on the grounds that that there's already been a paper in that subject published before. I'm expressing here, it's easy to understand that model theory has something to do with mathematics because it talks about the same objects. But set theory is probably deeper. And, I'm just giving the examples of the connections with mathematical objects and their connections with things which are not so interesting anymore, exactly because they've been pretty well understood. But the objects of set theory itself are also important. So Martin Steele Woodin talked in the ICM maybe, 4 years ago. And he did fantastic things. So Aaron Shelach here does a different kind of set theory, but also has discovered, maybe I'm talking too much here, but also discovered some properties of products of infinite sets, which, because of the forcing theory method, everybody assumed would be independent. Since 1963, it was totally obvious that you couldn't possibly, that they would just have no answers, but they have answers. They have answers because of something which is just impervious to the forcing method. So I'm probably omitting here. I'm a bad person to ask about names, and I'm probably,
Everything is recorded.
Okay.
Yeah, now I realize after this speech that why our two lectures were put together in the same session. There is actually the connection, and this refers to a part of my talk that I didn't get to, and this is the theory of games of perfect information. And as you must know, there is over there, starting with Walter Gale and Stewart and Bill Walsh, Martin Davis, is culminating with the work of Martin. There's this whole theory, and in there, there's the axiom of determinacy. Gale and Stewart proved that with the axiom of choice, there is a set, that there is an infinite game of perfect information which is not determined. So it has no value at either side. Given a strategy on one side, the other side has a strategy which makes it win. And then there is, this depends on the axiom of choice, and the contradiction of that is the axiom of determinacy, which is that every game of perfect information is determined, has a value. Can you comment what the relation of the axiom of determinacy about to the things that you were talking about just now?
Yeah, I mean, oh no.
I think we shouldn't get, into too detailed discussion about the intersection of the two last speakers. Oh, why? Okay. Okay. So this is the last mathematical evening, so we can be.
Okay. So first of all, let me just say again, and I'm not being modest, I'm being absolutely sincere, that I know set theory because I took courses as a graduate student and I loved it, but I consider myself further from it than most of you. However, in fact, this is an example of an idea taken from game theory, which was fantastically fruitful. It's one of the great unifying ideas of set theory. I'm not sure whether there's a relation between this question of determinacy and the rest of infinite games and the rest of game theory. But in set theory, it was first seen as a kind of strange and isolated question, and then when it was taken seriously, it became a fantastic unifying principle. Because you ask, given an infinite game, so you play infinitely often, and then you ask, must there be a winning strategy one way or the other? And the answer is yes, but the set theory, the complexity of proving that depends on the complexity of the game in a very, very interesting way. So the winning conditions, like you said, if they're open or closed, it's very easy to see that there must be a winning strategy. And if they are Borel, there is a winning strategy, and it's an example of a theorem just about Borel sets. Very simple theorem about Borel set that can be proved but cannot be proved without assuming a lot of set theory. Without assuming, well, much beyond real sets of sets of sets of reals and so on. Very few theorems are like that. Beyond that, it unifies, it just gives a unifying principle to the set theoretic. Okay, it turns out that questions of Lebesgue measurability of sets of reals and so on are the wrong questions. The correct question is determinacy of games of that type. And the right way to prove that a certain class of sets, for example, is Lebesgue measurable is to prove the real property, which is that games of that type are determined. And then you get the whole theory. And this question in itself, just depending on the complexity of the set, just has a beautiful hierarchy that starts, you can make it start from finite things. So ask almost computer science questions, recursiveness, and really computer science type questions about complexity, and then go through infinite, recursive, analytic, and this is what the Martin Steele paper in fact was about. It was proving determinacy of definable sets of real numbers, assuming a certain, what is the so-called large part numbers.
Can you make some, because you're not in the position here, can you make one conclusive statement about the idea of perspectives?
What?
Perspectives, because everybody speaks about perspective mathematics, and you're the only one to say something about logic. Perspectives and logic. That's essential.
Well, no, I just cannot say, first of all, I don't want to buttonhole set theories. I cannot say anything about the future of set theory. It's really very practical. I've never done research related to it in any way.
But I see set theory?
Yes, I see a set theory. Similarly, for proof theory, there was, I don't know,
Pavlov said that he was a book theorist. I don't know if he's here. But, and I know that there's one other. So I don't know. In model theory, first of all, I mean, this is just vision towards 2000. So just for the next 5 months, I have to give vision. And for this, I said various things.
On the lordship. No distraction.
Stan Ulam once gave a talk titled The Future of Mathematics in the University of Chicago, and he gave a usual mathematical talk without anything about the future. And at the end, somebody asked him, but Professor Ulam, what is the future of mathematics? And say, how can I know? It's in the future, now it's the present. Eventually, he was ready to make the prediction that measurable cardinal, large cardinals will have a lot of impact in partial differential equation. Not yet, but maybe tomorrow. Okay, so.
Dennis and Lucille, but it's your. No game. Dennis.